Hi, and welcome back to this C++ plugin development tutorial series for Cinema 4D. So where we left you in the last tutorial was you could left click to draw a circle, and you could right click to remove it. And if you left clicked and resize the dialog, it would leave it in the proportional location that you drew it. So here it's sticking to the center of this dialog. So what I'm going to do now is change it so that you can actually click and drag. So maybe you want to click and drag a rectangle in that view. And I'm also at the moment, I'm just going to change this over first to remove that floating point because I want to stay with integer space. So I'm actually going to change that from float to int. And in the user area, I'm also going to just remove that code that I did and change the last x to be mx and the last y to be my. And again, on the draw method, we don't need to multiply against that width. I'll just remove the multiply there and from there as well. And in the constructor, they don't need to be floating values. We can just make that integer values of 0. So I just want to remove that because it might be a bit confusing if I'm dealing with the floating space and integer values for this lesson here. So we've just changed those over to ints. I'm just going to recompile and build that and just make sure that that still works. I'm going to look at some of these warnings. I'll come back to those later. But there's one at the bottom, DC. We're not using this yet, and so I'm just going to comment that out, and at least we won't see that DC warning. Where you see warnings down here, they're always good to look at because you may have done something wrong that C++ is trying to hint you and say, hey, I think this doesn't look quite correct. Are you sure this is what you wanted to do? So always very valuable to check the warnings and remove them by adjusting your code just so that you're not doing anything that you shouldn't be doing. It's not an error. The code would still run with those warnings, but they're very helpful for finding things out. In this case, I've just commented out because it wasn't used. So C++ was just saying, it doesn't look like you're using this. Do you really need that at all? Because you might be making a call that's computationally expensive, and you just don't need to do it because the result's not used. Okay, so now I've just compiled that, and then we'll just run that just to make sure that everything is working as intended. Again, I'm using Cinema 4D R21, but the code that I'm writing for all these tutorial series is compatible for everything R21 and higher. You can check out the first tutorial series to see first episode to see how to set up for Visual Studio 2019. I'm using Visual Studio 2017 in this. But anyway, we have our user area here, and I'm just going to click and draw a circle, and I right click and it's removed. But as you see now, if I was to click in the middle here and resize, it's going to come with us. It's going to stick where I basically clicked it. It's not going to be proportional anymore. So let's just close that down. And now what I want to do is I want to poll the mouse event so that as I click and drag, it's going to always give me the location of the mouse. And to do that, I'm going to do that straight after this call here, setting those values. I'm going to use create a base container. I'm going to call it res. And we want to do this using a new C++ syntax here called while. And it's a bit like speaking English, really. While get input state. So we're going to say while this returns true, keep doing some code, okay? So while this is true, keep running this function. And it's a little bit scary doing while loops because if you don't break out of this, then it'll continue forever and it'll lock Cinema 4D up and you will not be able to use it. So you have to do these while statements very carefully. Now, what we want to do is we're going to say while the mouse input for the left mouse while it's down, grab the information and put it into this. Now I'm passing this in just directly, res is going straight in there, because this is being passed in by what's called a reference, which is that ampersand there. That's within this method parameter list here. So when you pass in a reference, you're letting this function, it's kind of like a pointer, but you're letting this this method here, you're allowing it to change this because I've just passed it in and saying if you want to do something to this, you can. And when they access that inside that method, they only need to type res and press a dot to access all the values. Whereas if it was a pointer as a star, you'd have to access it with the arrow there. One other thing just to point out here, this method here is coming in with a base container as well. And this is coming as a reference, but it's coming as a const reference. And what that means is that inside this method here, you are not able to change that. You cannot modify this base container at all. You can't call set int32, okay, because it's it's constant. You're not allowed to change it. But in this, we're passing our base container into get input state, and there's no constant in front of it, which just allows that get input state. It's saying anything that gets passed into me as a reference, I'm allowed to change, and that's exactly what it does. It fills it up with data. And what it's going to do, I'm just going to delete that double click line. What it's going to do is it's going to do pretty much the same stuff as what we've got right here. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. And it's going to allow us to get these values from that base container the same way as we did the message one. I'm going to rename this to MXX and MYY so it doesn't clash with MX and the MY up here. And likewise in here, MXX and MYY. And one other thing we want to make sure is that at the moment, this might not break out of here. It might not ever escape. So to be able to do that, you need to give it a way to escape this function. And you can do that by going if res dot get int32 bfm underscore input underscore value is equal to 0. So if that is equal to 0, then the input into that from calling this, there's nothing in there. It's saying nothing has been changed. And we can just go break. And what that means is that when this input value is 0, if we ask the result from here in the base container, we asked it for an int32 for the BFM input value ID. And if this comes back with a value of 0, then we break, which means it'll skip over all this. It'll break right out of this, and it's going to break, and it's going to jump right to here. And then it's going to start calling the code from here onwards. So it'll call that, call redraw, and recall true, and it'll break. That will then leave this entire method and let Cinema 4D continue on its way. If we did not have this in here, this while loop would go forever, and Cinema 4D would lock up, and you would have to kill it in your task manager. So be very careful here. Now that we've got this MX and MY, we've converted it into local space. And just for testing right now, I'm just going to change the last X and last Y value to be these same values. So what should happen now is that as you click your mouse and drag, it'll stay in here and it'll keep altering that location of the circle. And I'm also going to put in a redraw here as well, because we want that to be redrawn on screen. So as the user's dragging, the little circle's going to move around the screen until they let go, and that's going to come back as empty. It's going to break out. So let's just put a breakpoint right on that breakpoint. So I've got it on that same line. And I'm going to compile my code and run it, and we'll just see what happens. Now, if you do get into a situation where Cinema 4D has frozen, I'll show you how to purposely test that in a second. So I've compiled it, now I'm running the code. And now if I click, and I just clicked and let my mouse go, it came into this and it's hit the breakpoint. So now it's broken out. So we know that we correctly broke out of here. So now if I click, you can see it's polling, it's in here, and it's going to continue polling. And when I moused up, then I hit that breakpoint and it got out. So a single click is doing what we want. If I click and drag, it's going to draw as well. Okay, but what we want to do is click and drag and put a rectangle in there. So let's close that down. So what we want to do now is we want to draw a rectangle, and we want to draw it from where we first click to where the mouse last was. Okay, so I'm going to add a couple of extra variables in here, and I'm going to call it first x and first, not first, first y. Okay, first x and first y. And we want to initialize these in the constructor at the top. So scroll to the top. Let's just clean up this a bit as well. Let's press return on this and just make this a little bit nicer looking, because otherwise you'll end up with a very big line. So first x, let's just say 0, and first y 0. Because here we have our first x and first y, and we want to set those values. So down here, we're going to say underscore first x equals mx, underscore first y equals my. So we've recorded those values, and then while we're in here, these two are going to change. And so now we just come up to our draw method, and we'll leave the ellipse there for now, so we'll draw that as well. And we'll just say draw rectangle, and we'll say from first x underscore first y to the current x and y, which is being set up here for last x and last y. So it's not taking these vector 2Ds, it's just taking the values directly. And I'm actually going to comment out that for now, and we'll just run this and see what happens. See, there's a error here. This error is saying, not an error, a warning. The data member circle visible will be initialized after first x. So as a general rule of thumb, it's not so much of an issue on Windows, but on Linux it is definitely an issue. You should initialize your variables in the same order that you've added them here. So just to clear that up, I'm actually going to put that like there. Actually no, I'll leave that how it was, but in the initialization list, I'll move circle to the bottom. And now if I build again, I won't see that error. On Linux, I believe that actually can be a hard error or a problem with the initialization list, but I just thought to clean that up now because I just saw it. But I like to keep values that are related together, so last x and first x, I wanted to keep them together, which is why I moved them in the header file. So now if I click and drag, we're seeing a rectangle, but only seeing it after I click first. So the first time I did it, you didn't see anything. But now as I click, you can see that it's happening. So let's just change this layout. For some reason, Camtasia stops me from getting some of these drop downs to standard. And I'm going to go back to the layout that I had, which is now my startup user. And it's still the same there. Let's just restart Cinema 4D and see if we can reproduce that behavior, and then we'll look at the code. So the problem there was the very first time I clicked and drag, nothing happened. There was nothing on screen. So here we have this, and if I click and drag and let go, so that first time it did take the points, but it didn't actually redraw. So just have a look at the code and see what's going on there. And the reason was blocking that code because I'm only drawing it when circle visible is true. So if we come down here, you see that the first time we draw this, this is being redrawn here, but circle visible isn't true. So I'm just going to get rid of circle visible. I'm just going to let this draw all the time. So I'm going to remove that completely, even though we just changed our and so I'm getting rid of that whole circle code from everywhere. At the top we have a initializer, and instead I'm just going to say if the first x is not equal to the last x, and the first y is not equal to the last y. I needed an underscore there. And maybe even just to clean that up, I could just put last x, last y, and I can remove that completely from there. So now it's just doing a logical comparison and saying if this value in 32 value is not the same as that last value, and this one is not the same as that one, then you can draw a rectangle. Otherwise, don't draw anything. And let's just run that and see what happens. So now we're just not worried about that circle visible value. And so it now should appear when we first click and drag, and then we can see click and drag. And it will also work in the opposite direction. Okay, dragging from any angle you want. Now I was going to show you what happens if you've messed up your code and for some reason you left that out. Okay, so I'm going to compile this and run it. So what's going to happen here is that this is when we first click, it's going to come into here, and this is never going to exit. It's going to be there forever. So I'm going to run my code. And everything's fine now. Cinema 4D is responsive. If I was to resize that, everything's okay. But if I click and drag and now let go, now click and drag and let go, oh, it's actually responsive. No, it's not. I can't get out of here. See, it's not letting me do anything. If I click anywhere in the interface, it's getting an X and Y coordinate, and it's trying to convert it for this. So this is kind of locked up, right? I can't click on anything. I can't use anything. You've broken it. To fix this, or find out what the problem actually is, you come back into Visual Studio. Come up the top here, and click this pause button, which is actually break all. So we click that, and it's going to stop in the code where it's having its problem, or where it's spinning around. So you can see here, it's currently we've paused it, and it's in the get input state method. Now, if you come over to the bottom right, you should have call stack tab here. If you don't have a call stack tab, you can get it, I believe, from debug, Windows, call stack. Okay, so if you don't see it in your interface, that's where you get this window from. And you can see where the functions have been coming from. So currently we're in get input state. If you were to double click on the next one, you'll see it's now an our function. So it's saying it's our function here, our method, that's calling get input state. And that's come from UserArea, which is calling this. And that's come from a dialog callback. So you can go all the way back to see where this function's come from, this call. But the problem is obviously in our one, because we wrote the code. So test UserArea, get input event. And so we can say that's locked in there. And you're like, I wonder what's going on. So let's just put a breakpoint within here. And then we click play. And now we can step through. You know, we can step through it, and you step through it. And then you can kind of realize, well, my mouse is in this interface here. Nothing's happening in Cinema 4D. It shouldn't be doing this. It shouldn't stay in this method. It needs the way of breaking out. We've got a while statement, and there's no way for it to break out. Get input state is always coming back true, and you can even question yourself as to why is that happening by right-clicking, go to declaration, and you can see true if an input state could be retrieved. But in this case, you're thinking, well, I'm not doing anything with the mouse in Cinema 4D, but even though you're not, Cinema 4D is still polling the mouse. It's still asking the mouse, what is the state of its left mouse button? Where is it? Is it up or down? That's just going to continue doing that, and it'll continue returning true. So this will just spin forever. And if I was to remove that breakpoint and click play, but stay in here, go back to the it'll switch over to Cinema 4D again. But if you go back to Visual Studio, I can put a breakpoint in here right now while it's playing, and you can see it's going to hit it. And then you can step over, and you can see that it's stuck in there. And when you do that, that's how you can find where the problem is and see that it's your fault. And then you can fix it by putting in whatever code's required to break out of these while loops so that you don't leave Cinema 4D in a broken state. So now we'll just compile that again. We've put our exit point there, and we'll press F5 to play it. And now we can use it as before. And it's breaking out, and everything else is still usable. We can still click our buttons and do everything else. Okay, that's enough for today. Okay, that's enough for today. Thank you very much, and see you on the next tutorial. Cheers.